not yet, then, welcome back. We just had another webinar last Friday. So very nice to see all of you again on a Tuesday afternoon in Singapore and in Brussels morning. Maybe I will just pass off the mic to Chris. Chris will just do a quick opening remarks. And then after that, we'll go straight into a pre-recorded speech from the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, DSG Satvinder Singh, for some quick pre-recorded remarks, and then we'll go straight into the panel discussion. I also want to temper expectations. I know I put the webinar for 1.5 hours, but we'll not do the 1.5 hours in full. We'll just do maybe 1 hour, 15 minutes. This is also depending on whether or not, you have questions. So if you do have any questions, anything for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A session, and I will get to you very, very shortly. So without further ado, may I please invite Chris to just do a very quick remarks, and then we'll go straight to the remarks from DSG Singh. Chris, please.
Thank you, Liana, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm currently sitting in Hanoi. Good morning if you're joining from Europe for this. The Business Council is taking sustainability issues extremely seriously, and that is why we're having this webinar today to talk about developments in the circular economy in Southeast Asia. Indeed, at the Council, we have recently set up a thing we call the Circularity Coalition. And the reason for that is we want to try and drive the adoption of circularity concepts across Southeast Asia quicker and faster than they are currently being put in place. And additionally, we want to make sure that the voice of the private sector is heard in discussions about how circularity is being driven and taken forward across the ASEAN region. What we see in the region is a lot of appetite for this. There are quite a few different projects and ideas being developed out there. ASEAN themselves, as you'll probably hear from the DSG in a moment, has developed their own circular economy framework, and they're beginning to try and put some flesh on the bones of that going forward. At the Council, we see a number of problems. One of it is the lack of the right rules and regulations in place in different markets to help promote the use of recycling, remanufacturing, and the reuse of goods. The other one we think as well is educating the public. People need to understand more about the value of the circular economy and how each of us as individuals can play a role in that going forward. And then the final part, I think, of the equation that's missing is actually making sure we have a viable recycling, remanufacturing, reuse industry out there. So it's all well and good saying we're going to recycle and collect things in different bins and segregate our waste and do good waste management, but if there is no industry there to then support that, to do the cleaning and repackaging and remanufacturing and recycling of those goods, then everything will then grind to a halt. So I think 3 issues that need to be addressed, and in our view, at the heart of that is making sure the private sector is involved in those discussions, whether they're manufacturers or retailers or restaurants or whatever. All of us have a role to play, whether we're large companies, whether they are micro enterprises, and us as individuals as well. So a lot of work to be done. I believe the different entities in the region that are looking at this and are trying to promote it are all pushing for the same thing. And it makes sense then to try and form as broad a coalition as we can going forward. I think I'll leave my remarks there. You can listen to DSG Satvinder Singh now. Liana will play the video shortly. But there is a lot of stuff being done at the ASEAN level, as I think you're about to hear. Thank you.
Mr. Chris Humphrey, the Executive Director of the EU-ASEAN Business Council, distinguished speakers and esteemed members of the ASEAN Circularity Coalition. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. Let me begin by first congratulating the ASEAN EU Business Council for the establishment of the ASEAN Circularity Coalition. Truly a commendable initiative reflecting the private sector's strong support for green transition. It's indeed a pleasure for me today to be able to be here addressing the members of the coalition as well as participants of this webinar. I'm confident that with the strong support from all of you, the private sector, ASEAN will be able to navigate the dual challenges of both economic growth as well as environmental responsibility. Now, understanding this concept of circular economy is still a challenge for many businesses, particularly in developing countries in ASEAN. While many may be familiar with the goal to decouple economic growth from environmentally degradation, the complexity of making the green transition along the supply chain is still an enigma to regulators as well as to private sectors alike. Therefore, the establishment of this ASEAN Circularity Coalition, which aims to be kind of like the platform for advocation of key circularity issues and facilitation of dialogue among stakeholders, it really represents a critical next step towards enhancing awareness as well as capacitating the key players in the circular economy space in our region. Now, the global shift towards sustainable production and consumption is coming on stream very rapidly. It's almost turbocharged by the rising climate-related regulations that's happening around the world. For example, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and other regulations under the EU Green Deal. In fact, last month, new regulation on waste shipment enters into force for the EU, imposing a ban on hazardous and non-hazardous waste exports starting from 2026 onwards to countries unable to demonstrate environmentally sustainable waste treatment practices. Now, the EU ban on waste shipment, for example, clearly it poses a kind of a significant economic impact to ASEAN if immediate actions were not taken. In fact, according to a report by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes between 2017 to 2021, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam together imported approximately 58 million tons of metal waste from advanced economies for circular economy purposes, particularly in the manufacturing of goods that require precious metals. Now, this feedstock of metal waste may no longer be importable from the EU if ASEAN lacks the necessary infrastructure and the support policies towards green transition. Nevertheless, beyond its environmental goal, ASEAN recognized that circular economy also offers significant economic benefits. Now, based on estimation in the ASEAN strategy of carbon neutrality, transition to circular economy is expected to create up to almost USD 4.8 billion GDP uplift for our region by the year 2050, to be delivered through several key areas, including industrial processes and product use. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2021, the ASEAN economic ministers, they adopted the framework for circular economy for the ASEAN economic community. This framework has identified 5 strategic priorities that focuses on, first, standard harmonization, second, on trade facilitation, third, in the area of the role of technology and innovation and digitalization, fourth, it focuses on access to financing, and fifth, it focuses on energy efficiencies, all in order to come together to help us accelerate as well as to help us to scale up the ASEAN's region's transition towards circularity. The implementation plan for the framework was adopted by the ASEAN Economic Community way back in February of 2023. Now it's to be rolled out between 2023 to 2030. And what we have done in this entire plan, implementation plan, is the identification of 67 circular initiatives outlined for agriculture, transportation, energy, and the energy sectors. And this is in kind of an initial phase of implementation. It's a phasal approach. Now these activities, 67 of them, mainly falling within the 4 major categories that are related to standards, trade facilitation, access to sustainable finance, and capacity building. As of the November of last year, in 2023, end of last year, 10% of these initiatives identified under the implementation plan have been completed, while approximately 20% of the initiatives are already currently ongoing. Now, recognizing the cross-sectoral nature of circular economy, ASEAN have also established a focal group for circular economy in order to monitor the implementation of the circular economy framework. Now, the members of the focal group, it consists of representatives from the relevant sectoral bodies of ASEAN, such as agriculture, transport, energy, environment, as well as from the capital markets. The inaugural meeting of this focal group of circular economy was held on the 1st of November last year in 2023, and it considered coming together of the establishment of the Industry Advisory Panel, consisting of representatives from the private sector, representatives from think tanks and academia, to come together to also be able to provide industry perspectives and recommendations with regards to prioritization of initiatives, with regards to the impact of some of these initiatives, and of course giving us the guidance on the way forward on matters related to the implementation of a practical circular economy framework. Allow me to share with you three landmark initiatives that will support the private sector's transition to circular economy. First, ASEAN is currently, we are negotiating the upgrade of the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, the ATIGA Free Trade Agreement for ASEAN, for the 10 countries. It's scheduled to be concluded by the end of 2025. Now, this upgraded FTA agreement for the region, ATIGA, is going to be focusing on incorporating circular economy elements focused on remanufacturing in order to ensure a seamless flow of used goods within the region. This will significantly help the original equipment manufacturers, especially in the electronics, machinery, electrical industries, to extend the life of their products and to meet the global decarbonization requirements by directing waste away from the landfills and to reduce environmental impact. This is definitely going to have a big impact in creating the relevancy of the region as a sustainable global supply chain hub. Second, let me also share with you that we are enhancing awareness and our competence across the sectors in ASEAN by establishing the ASEAN Center for Excellence for Green Transition. This center will serve as a capacity building platform which will empower ASEAN micro, small and medium-sized enterprises to be moving towards transition towards circular economy. Now, beyond just supporting manufacturer and producer in adopting circular economy business model, this center will also seek to support the entire business ecosystem. Now, this includes capacitating the legal sector to navigate the impacts of the EU regulations under the EU Green Deal, especially on ASEAN exports, as well as training the trainers in carbon accounting and sustainability reporting. These are just some of the few initiatives that this center is going to be taking the lead. Now, third, let me also share with you that we are also planning to establish a sustainable finance support hub to help project owners in ASEAN in enhancing the bankability of their projects and to create a pipeline of investment-ready ventures. We are in the final stage of securing ASEAN member states' endorsement for the project and to anticipate the launching of the initiative, hopefully somewhere in the near future, by being able to attract much-needed green funds to the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to emphasize that ASEAN's path to sustainability and circularity is far from smooth sailing. There's a lot to do. Among the challenges that ASEAN encounters, it includes, for example, the lack of awareness, the lack of understanding of circular economy concepts. There's also limited infrastructure or even technological capabilities. And there's obviously also disparity in the policy landscape for circular economy in the region. And again, there are also weaknesses, including limited access to financing and socio-economic disparities. And I'm just naming some of them, challenges that we are confronted with. But more importantly, we believe that the success of our circular economy efforts, it really hinges on effective private and public collaboration. Honestly, this is so critical. Moving forward, the EU, ABC, and the ASEAN, we can definitely explore a lot more creative opportunities, a lot more practical partnerships with renewed enthusiasm in order to come together to advance circularity initiatives. I think by fostering deep partnerships and by sharing open best practices, we can definitely harness the expertise and the resources of the private sector from all of you in order to help the region to drive towards innovation and also to scale up our circular ambitions. We are also very keen to engage our governments in the region, governments abroad. We like to engage businesses, the civil society organizations all over the world in order to help us in collaborative initiatives that will help us promote sustainable development. I think we are all working very hard towards being able to create an enabling environment in our region that can incentivize investments for circular economy projects and initiatives. This is a critical juncture where we need to build that ecosystem well. In conclusion, let me say that the journey towards circular economy in ASEAN, we all know it's both challenging, but it's also a great opportunity. ASEAN is committed to working with all stakeholders to advance our shared goals of economic integration and sustainability. We believe that embracing of circular economic principles, we can all forge a much more resilient, a much more inclusive, a much more prosperous situation, ensuring that we are thriving in a resilient way for generations to come. Let us continue to collaborate, fostering innovation and leading by example on the path towards circular economy in ASEAN. I wish all of you insightful and a very productive webinar ahead.
All right. I think that was a really, really good message from DSG Satvinder, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I think in the spirit of collaboration as well as public-private partnership, this is one way for us to do it. So joining me today is our representatives from the various sectors. For example, we've got Carlo Alberto Protesi. He is the president at the European Institute of Innovation for Sustainability. We've got Claudia Chan, Senior Director, Public Policy for ASEAN and South Pacific at the Coca-Cola Company. And we've got David Aryavat, who is the Communication and Engagement Specialist at the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue. So thank you very much, panelists, for joining us today. Maybe, David, I'll start with you. I just wanted to find out, since you're from the ACESP, what are some of the key insights that you've gained regarding the implementation of circular practices in the region? Because as you heard just now, DSG was mentioning that there are a lot of challenges, including, the very different sort of levels of development of ASEAN, and there's limited access to financing. There's also, limited infrastructure. So I just wanted to find out from you what the landscape is like in ASEAN right now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Liana, for the question, and thank you so much for providing me this opportunity to contribute to this webinar. So firstly, allow me to briefly tell everyone regarding the ASEAN Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. So our platform was established as a regional knowledge and information portal with a mission to help ASEAN member states achieve sustainable consumption and production by accelerating a transition to circular economy. And it is a part of an ongoing ASEAN-EU partnership. And our platform was inspired by the success of the EU Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, and by learning from the European platform and other similar regional initiatives, we support the transition by providing access to good circular economy practice strategy to our knowledge and information, facilitating stakeholder engagement and organizing events and annual circular economy forum for ASEAN. And ACSD is the host institution of this platform, and we are located at Mahidol University, Thailand. And we are supported by the Enhanced Regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue Instrument as well as Switch Asia. And responding to your question regarding insights, from the operation of our knowledge and information portal regarding the implementation of circular practices in this region, allow me to share my observation in three areas. First is the stakeholder engagement or diverse stakeholder engagement. Firstly, I would like to highlight the importance of engaging various stakeholders ranging from governments, businesses, and civil society organization in order to foster collaboration and, more importantly, innovation in circular economy practices. And inter-organizational or cross-sectoral collaboration involving various stakeholders is crucial to foster collaboration in innovation. And as you know, as circular really transition requires systematic change that can only be achieved through coordinated efforts across different sectors and level of societies. And the second point of the our observation or the insights is on the policy development and implementation. As you mentioned earlier, and the DG Satwinder Singh also mentioned regarding the, several gaps and challenges. So we would I would like to suggest that while there were varying level of policy developments and economic development across ASEAN member states, there is a growing recognition on the need for a more cohesive policy that supports circular economy principle. As DG mentioned earlier, there are implementation plan for the CE framework for the AEC that would facilitate effective implementation. Again, there's a challenge still remain, which requires stronger regulatory framework as well as enforcement mechanism. And with the lack of supranational characteristic of ASEAN, when comparing to the European Union, this slowed down the transition to CE in several ways. While our region, our ASEAN is trying to foster regional cooperation in different areas, but we do operate on non-interference and consensus principle, which oftentimes limits our ability to enforce a more cohesive and binding policies across member states. And last point of my observation is the need for capacity building as well as knowledge sharing. There is a critical need for capacity building for different group of stakeholders, different level of societies, and sharing of best practice across region. And there are numerous platform and initiatives with an intention to disseminate or to facilitate knowledge exchange. But from our observation, a more programmatic and systematic approach is needed in order to develop synergies among different existing knowledge platform or capacity building initiatives. So that's roughly our insight regarding the implementation of circular practice in this region. I'll just stop here. Over to you, Liana.
Thanks, David. No, I actually have a follow-up question, from your perspective. Because DSG already outlined so many initiatives that's happening on the ASEAN level. He mentioned the 3 upgrade of ATIGA, increasing awareness by establishing an ASEAN Center for Excellence for Circular Economy, and there's also an establishment of sustainable finance support hub. So there's quite a lot of things happening, but I'm just trying to find out, from your perspective, what the current gaps are in achieving circularity in ASEAN, and what solutions do you think there are to that are being proposed to address these gaps?
Okay, so regarding the gaps in the for achieving circular economy in ASEAN, allow me to share 4 types of gaps. First is the regulatory and policy gaps. As mentioned, there needs to be more harmonized regulatory framework, and because the diversity of level of policy development, while some countries they have more advanced policies, others still in very early stage, and with a more unified approach, policy can be with a not unified, ununified approach, policy tend to be inconsistent. And furthermore, waste and resource management issue often transcend beyond national borders. These inconsistencies in policy can lead to difficulty in managing transboundary waste flow as well, illegal dumping, and disparity in recycling practices. As DG mentioned earlier, ASEAN released and issue different types of framework, mechanism, institution to support this, the unification of regulatory and policies framework. The second type of gap I wish to talk about is the infrastructure and technology, as aligned with what DG Satvinder Singh mentioned earlier. Many ASEAN member states lack of necessary infrastructure and technology to support a CE initiative, and more investment or significant amount of investment in waste management system, recycling facility, or technological innovation are critical. And as we know, many ASEAN member states still lack, adequate waste management system, collecting system, sorting system, or even processing facility. And these hinder the adoption of circular behavior among general publics as well. For the technological innovation, the adoption of technology to support CE practice, such as digital platform or for resource sharing, advanced recycling technology, or waste to energy system is still in its very early stage of development. And third type of gap is the funding and investment, because access to funding and investment for CE is very limited. As we know, many CE initiatives, especially those MSME, micro, small, and medium enterprise, require significant upfront investment. And this group of enterprise comprise a large part of ASEAN economy. They often struggle to access to necessary capital to adopt new technology or practice. Furthermore, there is a lack of incentive and support as well. So that's roughly about the gap for CE in this region. But in terms of, I allow me to disagree in one point with the DSG on the level of awareness, because from our point of view, we believe that awareness is there, but in terms of the readiness and readiness of supporting infrastructure is not there. So even though the consumers are really aware of the practice or environmental benefit, but again, there needs to be a proper infrastructure in place in order to drive this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, David. I think you made some very, very important points. I think I also like to take this opportunity to go to our other panelists. Maybe I'll start with you, Claudia. Some of the gaps that David mentioned include a harmonized regulatory framework for businesses like yourselves. I mean, you are huge. You're a global brand. How important is it for businesses like yourself, for ASEAN, to have this sort of unified approach to circularity?
Yeah, I'll echo what David and ASEC DSG Savinder has said. It is very critical in terms of harmonized standards and regulations. I think David alluded to this as well when he mentioned the cross-borders waste management classification. And I want to say that the right classification is important. We've seen it not just in plastics waste management, but where I come from previously in my career in tech, electronics waste as well. What is waste to one party if you classify it inappropriately? It cannot become the inputs for a circular economy. So that classification is very important, because it could, if it's not harmonized, you can't move things across borders to be processed, and that involves that circularity piece, right? You need to move this type of materials cross borders. So in that reuse, reduce, environmental circular economy, that's particularly important. And we've seen that even in the reproduction of PET bottles as well, because the pricing is especially important. And for ASEAN to really become a hub whereby the circular economy, and I hear from DSG, he mentioned 4.8 billion uplift. That's a lot. So I think the basis of that interoperability is especially important.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I think this is a really good suggestion, because I was also going to ask you, from a business standpoint, things like infrastructure readiness, which is not necessarily there across ASEAN. and the lack of access to financing, I also wanted to find out from you if you have any sort of suggestions from the private sector for ASEAN in order to push forward with their circular economy initiatives. There's not a lack of ideas. It's about implementation, and it's about addressing some of the challenges in a very, very practical manner. And you are right on the ground as a business. So what are some of the suggestions that you might have? And after this, I'll go to Carlo for his input and also some of the best practices that we can adopt from the EU. So maybe I'll start with you, Claudia.
Yeah, sure. I'll share how we approach circularity, right? So we will look at three aspects, starting from the design aspect, and that's to make as much as possible our packaging recyclable. And we do have a target as well, for instance, by the year 2030, to make sure that at least 50% use of recycled materials in our packaging. Then there's the other aspect, which is the collections. So when the bottles or containers are out there, we also have the aim to collect and recycle the equivalent of every bottle of can that we have sold. That includes our brands and other brands in the market as well. So that collection aspect is important. So you have the design aspect, the collection, and last of all, and I think that is very important, because no one company or organization or government can do it alone. And that's what David has mentioned as well in terms of the stakeholders engagement. And we call that partnership. We work together with different partners to support a healthy and hopefully move towards a debris-free environment where circularity is in its full gear. For instance, to support packaging circularity, we have rolled out 100% recycled PET Coca-Cola bottles, excluding caps and labels, in most key countries in Southeast Asia and our key markets. And in the Philippines and in Indonesia, our bottling partners have also established bottle-to-bottle PET recycling plants. There's another aspect I want to bring up in terms of the infrastructure. So when we mention infrastructure, a lot of times our mind will be like, large production plants, high tech, that aspect. There's another aspect to the infrastructure in terms of collection in Southeast Asia, which is quite different from the environment in Europe, for instance. I think the informal sector is very important. And that's the livelihoods as well. It is very important when in our discussions with policymakers, our partner organizations, is to make sure that as we use tech and collections in the system, the informal sector is not displaced. There is capacity building as well, and to ensure that there is responsible sourcing so that empowerment goes on with that sector. And we have partnered with, for instance, the Circulate initiative to ensure in the program what they have called the Responsible Sourcing Initiative, to make sure that the informal sector is also taken care of.
Yeah, fantastic points, Claudia. Maybe, David, you'd like to comment a little bit on that. Does the ACESP, for example, look at the informal sector and try to incorporate that into your initiatives?
Yes, we thank you so much for the question, and Claudia for raising this point regarding the informal waste sector and the need for capacity building for this group of stakeholders. And if we our platform is of course we see the importance of involving this group of informal waste sector, especially in the context in my own country, for example, Thailand, where the infrastructure is not there. This group of people really play an important role in filling in the gap, that are missing. But oftentimes, like their voices are not really heard by when by the policy committees or business. So it is very encouraging to hear from Claudia regarding your initiative on building up the capacity of this group of people. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I would also like to urge our participants, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A box, and I'll get to you very, very shortly. Maybe now we'll take a different tack and then go to Carlo to look at the examples from the EU. You've heard about the challenges in the ASEAN context. What are some of the experiences on the European level that can be incorporated into ASEAN, you think?
Yes. Yes.
Best practices.
Thank you. Yes. No, I agree absolutely that the first step is collaboration, cooperation between stakeholders, between countries, and this is not always easy to do. I would also add that an important stakeholder that probably it has not been mentioned until now are consumers. To empower consumers, to let them understand exactly what circular economy means and how to do, and also to let them understand that consumers have some important responsibility, because when we speak about repairing, recycling, when we are speaking about waste management, at the end of the value chain, most of the times there is a consumer that has to be very well informed. So one of the things that I think are best practice in EU is, for instance, the labeling programs. So let the consumers the possibility of understanding very well what, for instance, even what to do about the packaging, because sometimes most of, as we know, most of the waste in Europe are made by packaging that are not recycled well, and sometimes are even not well designed in advance to avoid any kind of waste. I would say that Italy, fortunately, in this field at least, is really best in class, probably, because we have a system, it is a consortium called CONAI, C-O-N-A-I, that implement the extended producer responsibility. That means that producers of packaging, producers of goods, have to are required to pay an environmental contribution that is used by municipalities, by the national, to create all the infrastructure that are needed to create the reuse and specifically the recycling of all materials. So what I would say, probably the two most important stakeholders in this field are, from one side, producers that have to follow some rules, especially on for what concern eco-design of the packaging or the products that have to be designed not to produce any kind of not circular economy. And from the other end, also consumers that at the end of the life cycle have to do their duty to well organize their differentiated waste management. So I would say two best practices I would like to underline. One is, I just said, CONAI, this consortium that started 25 years ago in Italy, and it's working very well because now Italy is the #1 nation in Europe in terms of recycling of materials and of packaging. And the second example is one big Italian company that is Enel, the main electricity provider in Italy, who created a program for circular economy. So they created a methodology that not only they are using for themselves to exactly define what are the best process to create a circular economy in their devices, in their activity, in their processes, but they're also offering this service to other companies just to use the same platform, and so to cooperate with their suppliers and their consumers, their customers, to reduce any kind of waste and not circular activity.
Yeah, let me tell you, Carlo, I've been in Europe for the past 6 weeks, and it's been really difficult for me to recycle my plastic bottles. I mean, it's not a practice that we are used to in Southeast Asia. If I can be very honest with you, even if you're looking at development stages, like for example, I come from Singapore, even then we don't have a rigorous sort of recycling regulations, and the infrastructure just doesn't support it, because I have a big bin and I can just throw everything into the bin without any consequences. But you don't have that in Europe. There are different days for different things, and different bags for glass and
Exactly.
food. And so I think
Yes.
it's something that
Yes.
we can explore. But my next question to you then, what are the challenges? These are all really good practices, but ASEAN countries are not necessarily on the same sort of level as the EU. But the EU also has 27 countries, and they are also different, at very
Exactly.
different. Yeah. So I'm just wondering,
Yes.
how did they make it a success story?
Well, first of all, it must be a decision. So we still have in EU some kind of, let's say, controversial discussion about what is the best way of being circular. Just want to make an example. You can be sustainable and circular by recycling the materials, recycling plastic, recycling glass, recycling wood or whatever. Or you can be circular by reusing the packaging. These are two different alternatives. Not always it's possible to mix, because if you think, for instance, that reusing is the best way to be circular, of course, all the supply chain, all the logistic, and all the packaging has to be created in a way that it can be reused. Reuse means maybe stronger, maybe with more material, maybe also harder. And this is, of course, means that in the eco-design, you have to think that this is your goal. If you think that the recycling is better than reusing, of course, the packaging has to be very different not only in terms of design, but also in terms of stakeholders that are involved in all the value chain. So reusing something or recycling something, this is a political decision, and probably in Asia they have to do the same kind of discussion to understand what is the best way, because once that you have decided what is the best way, of course the infrastructure have to be created to allow this kind, to implement this kind of solution. So the problem is, first of all, we have to make a decision, and possibly the decision should be the same for all the countries. So it's a political challenge. The second, you need money, probably funds. So you have to create funds that can allow companies, but also, let's say, countries, to create the infrastructure that has to be created to implement the activity, and then trying to go on in the harmonization and standardization of the process. That's why it's so important cooperation, because if every country does create its own system, of course this doesn't help at all in the circular economy approach. We have to remember, like it was said just before, that maybe some company can cooperate using the waste of one company as a raw material of another company. And this way of cooperating is something that has to be seen and has to start in the company itself. Sometimes when we speak about circular economy, one of the challenge is to let the department inside the company to cooperate. Supply chain with marketing, legal with, I don't know, production, because we have to reinvent completely process and product. Then we need a cooperation between different stakeholders along the supply chain, along the value chain. So suppliers with producer with retailers, retailers even with consumers at the end. And then we have the most difficult, probably, cooperation, public-private sector. So companies has to cooperate with the public sector and to allow and to, let's say, implement the rules that has to be defined by the policymaker. So I would say it's a complex task, because from one side is a political task, a decision that has to be made from the political. It's a technological task, because we have to find the best way to implement the decision. And then it's, let's say, a soft skill task, because we have to help companies and people and single manager to open mind and try to find the best way to cooperate each others, because without cooperation, circular economy cannot be absolutely created.
Thank you so much for that, Carlo. I mean, that was really, really comprehensive. I wanted to ask you one thing. You know, we've listened to the Deputy Secretary General just now, and he outlined a slew of initiatives for ASEAN. Do you think the region is on the right track, based on everything that you're saying? You know, looking at political will, looking at financing, harmonization of standards, private partnership, these things that you mentioned is key to promote circularity in the region. Do you think ASEAN is on the right track? If not,
Yes.
where do you think it can improve?
Yes, I think it's in the right track, and probably the two things that have to improve is the speed, because when you say that in your country there is still no a system that helps companies and consumer to be sustainable, this is something that is a bit frustrating. Of course, we have to to make shorter the time to reach this kind of at least the European situation that is not the best, but at least is better than what is in Asia. And secondly, you can do something better than us. Using new technologies and let's say also the startup and entrepreneurial ecosystem that is so strong. Speaking about, I've been in Singapore, for instance, and I know that in this country there is an incredible startup ecosystem. There are incredible universities, incredible research institutes. So in Asia, there is a very strong power in terms of research and development, in terms of, let's say, innovative startups. So probably we have to start thinking that cooperation not only between big companies and not only between private and public, but also between very small but very aggressive and very let's say innovative startups and universities and the big companies and the big public sector, because I think the most of the solution have not been already invented. Solution in terms of new packaging, new products, new process, new infrastructure, and we have to ask help to everyone. So open innovation is probably something that in Asia can be done better than in Europe because of your capacity of not having, let's say, old mind attitude, but be very focused on the future, very focused on innovation. And this is the condition to become sustainable. Without innovation, I mean, sustainability is just a wishful thinking. You need innovation, and in innovation, I'm sure that Asia is better than Europe. So why not to push in this direction?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Carlo. Maybe Claudia, because Carlo mentioned a lot about the private sector, what is your take on this? It was very heartening to hear, Carlos's sort of optimism towards ASEAN as a region that's very young and very dynamic and, very, very active in the R&D sector. Yeah, so what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm glad Carlo brought up the point on consumers, right? How do we engage them? Because that's important being part of the whole circularity movement. And I just want to flag some examples of how we do it in Southeast Asia. In terms of technology, like what Carlo mentioned, and where I am now, I think together with Chris in Vietnam, in Hanoi, I want to cite an example that we're working with Dutan Plastic Recycling and their use of technology called the Vika app. It's a digital scrap collection application. And we have launched the Our Bottles Can Save Many Lives program in partnership with Dutan Plastic. So consumers in Ho Chi Minh City can use the app. They'll be matched with collectors where they can collect their empty bottles, and then consumers can earn accumulated points to redeem for prizes. So that's one way in terms of innovation. Then in other countries, for instance, in the Philippines, we are also having collection points in collaboration with, let's say, Shell, which is the gas stations, or with 7-Eleven, for instance. And most importantly, in terms of creating that awareness at our consumer events, we always make sure that the recycling awareness and education consumer outreach component is built in, having taglines like a bottle can have many lives, so that consumers understand that the bottles is recyclable or reusable. And there will be games and, let's say, machines where they could put things in and then retrieve some type of prizes so that it becomes fun. It doesn't just becomes a concept. It's not just a burden. They know that they can participate in the circularity economy and have fun at the same time. I think that's very important. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is all well and good, but if I can just be very honest, I think David, you
Sure.
also mentioned this earlier. You think that there is quite a lot of awareness in ASEAN about circularity. Um, but if I can be very honest, my parents don't, my friends do not care as well. How can we get consumers even more engaged, you think? And Carlo as well, you can also chime in if you want. It's all well and good if we have circular economy, but if the consumers don't participate, then that's another thing altogether. Should we make the regulations then mandatory? Should we penalize consumers for not engaging in circular economy practices, if they don't recycle the right way, is this the best way for us to move forward to ensure that it takes off in ASEAN? Also bearing in mind that it's a very different political landscape in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. Like for example, in Singapore, what works best is fining people, putting a hefty fine if they don't do certain things. Is this the way to go to get consumers on board circularity, you think?
The question is for me or for Claudia?
Anybody
Oh,
can.
okay, I would just add something that just arises in my mind now. In the cooperation is always the key, and I think that there is a stakeholder that is very important, that is the media industry, movie, film, TV. I know that, for instance, in Korea, the capacity of creating new lifestyles and also new reputation for South Korea, starting from music, starting from films, starting from Netflix series and let's say Oscar winning movies. It's something that in few years has completely changed the way that people around the world think and appreciate South Korea. So if you want to change the state of mind, if you want to change the way of people think about problems or opportunities, of course, you can do some tactics, and I think that fun and convenience is certainly one of the way, but you can also work on lifestyle, in thinking that doing something is better, is more cool than doing something else. And it's very difficult that this kind of style or way of thinking is changed by rules, by fines, or by the public sector. It's much easier if some art directors, some singers, some part of the entertainment and media industry take this as their goal, as their mission, and helps the country or the continent, if possible, to change. And it makes more a very, let's say, blockbuster movie to change the attitude of people than maybe hundreds of rules and fines or whatever. So this could be a very innovative way to act. And as I've seen in South Korea, it has worked very, very, very well. And why not to do it again for a different goal that is not just create a reputation and branding a country, but to create a new way of considering consumption and production.
Absolutely. Maybe this is a note that if any policymakers are listening in, they should, try and take down notes and implement some of the success stories. Claudia, you unmuted your mic. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add on. I think that's a great idea that Carlo mentioned in order to amplify that message. We also believe, right, together with other key industry players that have joined, let's say, the ASEAN Circularity Coalition, or even the global coalition, like the Business Coalition for Global Plastics Treaty, who's moving towards signing the UN Plastics Treaty this year, right? In the end, the operating environment, the rules of the circularity game, we think that is important to get that momentum going. The public sector has a strong role to play, and we're looking forward to work with the governments and industry to move towards concrete policy instruments and measures in order to have better circularity and plastic pollution. So that part, I think, is important. I do agree with Carlo as well. In the process, make it fun, have both the carrot. I won't say the stick, I'll say the guiding. The stick is not there to, penalize everyone, but to shepherd everyone to move towards progress and to move towards a positive direction, which is what the Global Plastics Treaty is moving towards.
Absolutely. I think there's a comment here from one of our participants. Strategic, research-driven, people-centered behavior change interventions must be designed and implemented. Absolutely. I think we spoke about that quite extensively. If I could just look at some of the questions that our participants have put up. One of it is the infrastructure gaps. They're often a challenge when it comes to circular economy initiatives, and governments may not have the economic means to invest on their own. So maybe Carlo, you can also answer this. And the question actually is also for the private sector. What role the private sector plays in closing that gap, but also Carlo and David, if you'd like to chime in as well. How can we look at financing infrastructure in Southeast Asia? So maybe
Well,
we, yeah, Carlo, yeah.
yes, I was just thinking to another example based in Asia. Do you think you know all the problem with the palm oil that's been in Europe, especially in Italy, but not only in France also, a very big movement of consumers asking for a more sustainable palm oil production. Because palm oil, we know if it's not made or grown in a correct way, it is one of the cause of deforestation and loss of biodiversity. Well, in that case, the big investment made by this industry, so all kind of infrastructure that have been created to have a sustainable palm oil supply chain, has been pushed by the request of consumers and retailers. So the idea probably is that the money goes where the market goes, and the money goes where there is a need. In that case, very big companies in Italy and not only had to change their products and to change their supply chain, have to pay a different the premium price for sustainable oil, palm oil, and palm oil producer had to convert and to innovate the way of producing, even using new technologies and like satellite monitoring and stuff like that. So probably apart from the asking, of course, the government to put money and to collect funds to finance this kind of innovation, I would say that things will change from the moment that the market is changing. So the way is to change first the market, starting from the demand, and then the supply will come along. Of course, big multinationals have the money to invest, but they invest money where they think it's worth and when they have a return. If they are asked to put money where there is no return on investment, or it's compulsory, I mean, it's mandatory, or of course they try to avoid it, and it's normal for a company who has a profit as a goal. So the important is to create the situation where this kind of infrastructure, this way of doing, has a return on investment, because the market not only allowed it, but is asking for it. In Italy, but not only, people are paying maybe something more if the product has no plastic inside, if the packaging is different, if it's recyclable. And this is something that for companies is important to know. And so again, education is important in ACE, in our institute, the European Institute of Innovation for Sustainability. We are very, very focused on education, because we think that at the end of the game, the beginning of everything is education. I mean, people have to know, not only be aware, but also understand something that it's not easy to understand, because the real problem of sustainability is that not an easy task to understand exactly what is the solution and what is not the problem. More or less, we understand over all of us. But what is the solution is not easy. The example I was making before between recycling and reusing is one of the trade-off that we have to decide. So we need competence, we need the skills, we need also to be prepared that more or later or before we have to take a decision, the decision on this. So probably we have to help the market to evolve, and then some of the things will happen. In Europe, it is working, more or less is working. So certainly, yeah, Asia can do not only technology transfer from Europe, but also, let's say, a business model transfer from Europe to Asia.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Carlo. Very, very comprehensive. I'm very, very aware and very conscious of time, and I already promised that I will let you go in by 11:15. So maybe I'll just go to one of the questions over here. Given the different frameworks of existing and planned regulations within ASEAN, how do we drive harmonization? David, I think this question might be for you.
Okay, so with the different frameworks and and existing plan, regulation, and action plans for this region, and how do we drive harmonization? Allow me to share my observation from some of the workshop, ASEAN workshop, with a focus on harmonization of standards in certain areas, such as packaging directive. When it's come to the awareness of many regional frameworks, member states and the stakeholder, they fully aware of, and they work towards that goal of the harmonization in any specific area. But from my point of view, I believe a extensive consultation process between member states, ASEAN Secretariat, and relevant stakeholders are needed, because oftentimes when attending this kind of standard harmonization workshop or harmonization workshop, people tend to within the meeting, people tend to be agreeable on the direction. But however, at the end of the day, when it's come to the individual member state, they tend to have question and don't really have full buy-in for those ideas for harmonization, due to the lengthy or difficulties in internal collaboration within their nation. It's much enough for them. Yeah, so that's one of my observation regarding the harmonization. So in short, an extensive consultation process, and the host or the person in charge from each member state need to be there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think maybe this is something that Carlo spoke about earlier, right? Political will is something that's very, very important. Once you get over that, I think ASEAN would really take off in terms of circular economy. One last question. Hang on. Wow. Okay, that's a very long question. Maybe I'll go one with Carlo first. Could you share the latest insights regarding the circularity or recycling of bio waste in EU versus ASEAN, and what are some of our learning points?
So the question is about bio waste, but not bioplastic, but bio in terms of like food waste, or
yeah, it seems
yes.
like it.
This
Bio waste.
is search. Yes. Okay. Okay. One of our big challenge is to reduce the food waste, for instance, and food waste is for you Italy, but not only, a big challenge. Probably you know that 30%, more than 30% of the food that is produced, it's wasted in some stage of the value chain, but especially in the households. So the waste in households is certainly collected in a differentiated way. So we have a different, let's say, channel for bio waste that can be not in this case, of course, not recycled, but reused for different use, also for in energy production. We are using some infrastructure that can start from this bio waste and create energy, and this is something that is working very, very well. The technology, and at this moment, it's so updated that it creates absolutely no pollution. It just transform waste in energy or in hot water or whatever is needed. From the other side, we are also asking people and retailers to understand very well how to use food. Labeling is important because the expiring date sometimes is not well understood by people. They just throw away food that is still good, and especially when they do their shopping, sometimes they buy too much because maybe there is some promotion, sales promotion, and at the end they throw away a lot of food every week. So the two situations is reduce the bio waste as much as possible, and secondly, the waste that still remain can be used as energy, as energy.
Okay. And I have two other questions. I think our audience is very, very active today. One of the things one of our participants mentioned was, I think some of the fundamental issues that presents a major obstacle to recycling or reuse need to be reviewed, such as the Basel Convention. The sooner this can be addressed, the greater the impetus for solutions to surface. What's your take on it, maybe Claudia or Carlo?
Maybe Claudia.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was looking through the
Yeah.
questions, Diana, and I actually wanted to answer another one, right?
Oh,
Which
okay.
is
Yeah, no worries. I
the
think that's
one
also the other
on
question.
what it means, or amalgamating some of the question, what it means to move towards the circular economy. If I've only one wish, right, what would I use it for? I would start with the baseline, similarly to the European experience. Start with what I call operating environment baseline. The extended producer responsibility is important. The EPR policies. Because that one, once you start that, you actually hurt and group industries to move towards that direction. I do want to encourage industries both in and outside of Southeast Asia or operating within Southeast Asia to think of it not as a stick, but not as a social responsibility or sustainability responsibility as well, but to the point that Carlo made, right? Because that the future of consumers, or even now, there is growing demand towards goods that are made sustainability or that are supportive of the circular economy. If you take into account the EPR policies and what's demanded of producers from it, you will be positioning your goods and services more competitively. You are future proofing yourself. So apart from the good that you do from the environment for society and in compliance with the regulations, you actually are future proofing your business. That's the point I want to bring across. And I think EPR policies, if I have one wish, I will wish for that.
Okay. Maybe we'll go to one last question. I think this one is on e-waste. Your views on circularity for e-waste in ASEAN. Maybe David, you can take this.
E-waste, right?
Yes, correct.
I mean, electronic.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe I can just say something about this. Electronic waste is, of course, a big part of the waste and a big challenge in terms of circularity. What we did in Europe, it's two things that are very important. One is to ask companies to be harmonized or standardized. For instance, the device recharger, because one of big part of the electronic appliance were the charger of a smartphone or computer and so on. So we asked to have just one kind of plug that is, I think, the mini USB. And so now you can use the same recharger for different devices without buying again every time that you change your smartphone. And the second thing is the right to repair. I mean, people used to throw away a device when it was not working anymore, and now there is the right to be repaired, a right to spare parts. So if you buy something you need and you have the possibility of repairing it, so having spare parts to repair it, and maybe use longer this device. The fact that we were using a smartphone only for a couple of years, it was of course not at all in a circular economy, let's say, approach.
And David as well, you wanted to say something.
Okay, so regarding e-waste challenge in ASEAN, so as we know, in several ASEAN member states, like there was an issue of anti-e-waste dumping from other region of the world to this region, and due to with a rising consumption and shorter life cycle, there is an increase in the volume of e-waste in this region, and coupling with the lack or inadequate e-waste management infrastructure, and it result in environmental impacts of various aspects. As a result, stronger regulatory and policy measures are needed to address this issue in this region.
Okay, I'm very, very cognizant of time. Maybe one last question for all of you. If you have one wish for ASEAN, for circularity, in an ideal world of a very successful circular economy or like circular environment in ASEAN, what would that look like for this region? What do you envision for ASEAN? And then we'll end the webinar. Well, maybe we can start with Claudia, and then we'll go to Carlo, and then we'll go to David.
Yeah, I'll be a little greedy and add on to my earlier EPR wish. So 1.1 to that. So same thing, EPR, but I hope that governments would allow multiple solution pathways for the private sector and stakeholders to move towards the management and reuse and circularity movement. Because if it's mandated one solution, it could be challenging. Or if it's like a copy and paste type of referencing solution for other regions in each country, there's different dynamics. That could get challenging in terms of the implementation. So multiple pathways and very close industry consultation, like what David and Carlo has mentioned, that would be my extension of my wish. Thank you.
David, maybe you're next. Oh, Carlo, anyway.
Okay, no, just my wish would be, in a way, also I said before, to engage better universities and the startup ecosystem in finding new solutions that we don't know. I mean, we cannot think that everything has already been invented. In this side of the industry, probably most are still to be invented. So the way of creating products that last more, the way of creating products that can be more, let's say, recyclable and use less resources is something that has, until 10, 20, 30 years ago, that was not a task for producers to do something that will last forever. Now we have to invent something like this, and this also need a new business model defining, like sharing economy. For instance, sharing economy is certainly one of the way of being sustainable. Or secondly, product as a service business model. So having the product that is not yours, but you can just use it. So designing in an innovative way products that allowed business models that are more sustainable than what we have now.
So for me, I dreamed of the, responsible circular economy. I dreamed of the circular economy that, every player is aware of their roles and responsibility. Governments no more, responsibility projection among stakeholders. Governments aware of their role, private sectors aware of their responsibilities, while consumers are aware of their responsibilities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. If I can just recap, it was great to hear everybody's wishes. We've also received some very, very good actionable recommendations, and we've also heard some of the best practices that can be adopted by ASEAN from the EU. I hope everybody who's listening, will take this home and really, think about implementing this in any way possible as a consumer, as a policymaker, so that we can really make ASEAN a livable and habitable place for the coming future. Now, I promised you 11:15. It's 3 minutes to 11:15. I will let all of you go. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I think it was extremely insightful for me personally as well. And some of the things that we learned today, we'll put it into a report. And we will be publishing it for everybody. A recording of this will also be up on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to listen in again if there are some notes that you'd like to take. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you very much our panelists for joining us today as well. It has been extremely insightful, and yeah, I hope to see you again soon. And in the spirit of public-private partnership, let's continue this collaboration. Thank you everybody for joining.